It's not the strongest of the species who survives or the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change.
Adapt or die. That is nature's way. We're talking about the Druid in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Greetings, travelers. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes.
On today's episode, we're taking a look at the Druid class in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Our in-depth video guide is going to help prepare your Druid to bring balance and harmony to the natural order of the world. We're going to look at the different Druid subclasses, spells, ability scores, and other build options to help ready your Druid for adventure. But we're also going to look at some role-playing ideas to round out your character's personality and background.
We're also going to get you inspired by looking at some famous Druids from mythology, books, television, and movies.
With that, let's get rolling.
So to start things off, why play a Druid?
Well, right from the beginning, Druids are such a unique and interesting class in Dungeons & Dragons. Perhaps the most adaptable class in the entire game.
Extremely versatile with a combination of being able to cast spells, but also some really cool other abilities like shape-shifting.
Yeah, it really puts them in tune with the natural order of the world and embodies their role in the universe of Dungeons & Dragons as sages and mystics, but also guardians and protectors of plants, animals, and the sacred spaces throughout the world.
So your Druid has the option to kind of tap into this natural beauty of nature, but then there's also the other side of that with the ferocity of the circle of life.
I think the most important thing is that no matter what your Druid's outlook is, no Druid would ever claim to be the master of the wilds or have dominion over nature. Rather, they see themselves as a part of the wider world. They see the way all living things are connected to each other. And I think that Druids of all stripes have this spiritual connection to the animals, plants, and natural forces that govern the cosmos of D&D.
They also have the benefit of being one of the most adaptable classes in the game.
It's unreal. Because of that focus on nature, they have natural magic, which embodies the fury of the natural elements. So they get great damage-dealing spells, but also spells that let them seize control of plants and animals, summoning creatures forth, or bringing vines up to entwine their enemies, or even calling upon earthquakes. It makes them super, super adaptable. And this is different from the versatility that other classes have, because the Druid can look at a situation and choose the right spells and abilities to make them strong in that moment.
On top of all of their spellcasting abilities, they also have the ability to wild shape into other creatures, which is a really big tool to use in almost any circumstance, because a lot of people see that and they say, oh, I can turn into this animal for combat purposes. But it's almost limitless what you can do with a wild shape in the right moment.
Absolutely. And I think that reinforces the idea that with a Druid, it's a great choice for somebody who always wants to be thinking about how they can seize the moment, how they can interact with the environment to gain the utmost advantage in whatever your situation, your adventure calls for, rather than needing to worry about building the perfect character, because all Druids have this connection to nature that they are completely inseparable from, regardless of how your Druid specializes.
So let's talk about the Druid's party role, starting with what's their role in combat?
Anything you want?
Yeah. We have all of these guys out here. With these guys, there's so many options for what your Druid can transform into.
And because of that, your Druid can be the bulwark. They can be the damage dealer. They can be the controller. They can even be the healer, right? It really depends on what the composition of the rest of your party is going to be, where your Druid falls into in combat. But because your Druid is always going to have this connection to the terrain and to nature, in combat you want to be thinking about how can I seize upon that in the moment. And maybe in one battle, your Druid is going to be right on the front lines and really making an impact there. But in other battles, you might need to be more of the spellcaster and the support character. It really depends on the situation, and I think that that's the strength of the druid in combat. And this carries through to in exploration as well, where I think that druids are a match, if not more so, to the ranger for helping your party survive in almost any environment.
Yeah, they usually end up with being very attuned to nature, survival, a lot of these abilities that can really help out with the exploration.
Yeah, because a druid is a ritual spellcaster, it means that they can bring the spells that help the party survive in the mountains, underwater, in the deepest forests, and lots of useful stuff even if you are delving into the dungeons or the urban jungle as well.
What about in social interactions?
So I think druids might be seen as the spiritual heart of their party. They might be a prophet and a guide because they have some access to some pretty cool divination magic. But the druid really doesn't have anything that makes them a specialist in talking to other people. They might be the heart of the party, but not necessarily the leader or its face.
The only instance that they might really shine in social situations is if they are talking to other people in nature, like other druids or hunters or rangers.
Yeah, and because druids often have the ability to speak with animals or plants, it can create these unexpected role-playing situations where the druid gets to role-play social interaction in the middle of an exploration scene.
So they may not be good at talking to people, but they can confuse everybody else when they talk to a tree for an hour. Let's look at some of the inspiration that we can draw from mythology, books, TV, and other sources to really look at some of the famous druids.
Well, as a class, the druid is deeply inspired and gets its name from the priests who were the spiritual and sometimes political heart of the ancient Celtic peoples. So there's a great connection to the people who built Stonehenge and many of the different tribal and early societies that emerged in what is now Ireland, modern-day France, and the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. One of my favorite druids, though, from Celtic mythology is Cathbad, the legendary druid of Ulster, who in some stories is maybe more of a bard, but I really like the Ulster cycle is a great source for awesome druids getting involved in really political situations as well.
One of my favorites, and he doesn't really do any wild shaping, but Radagast the Brown from the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit series is probably my favorite depiction of the quirky hermit in the woods. He has like the bird's nest in his hair.
Yeah.
Has like all the pets and all the animals come to him. And I just think like his tie to nature and the fact that he's so removed from society gives like this really cool role-playing idea.
I think we see this a lot in other sources of inspiration for druids because druids as characters in fiction have a lot of overlap with both witches and wizards. So in some stories, Merlin and Morgan Le Fay from the Arthurian cycles are much closer to druids in what they do than they are maybe to wizards or witches. And I would even say if you played Dragon Age, Morgan really is more of a druid in the magic that she uses. She's a shapeshifter first and foremost.
Yeah.
And she just happens to have all these other spells, which are pretty elemental depending on how you built her in your playthrough of the game. If we're going a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, I think Poison Ivy could be a really cool inspiration for a druid.
Yeah, it's not as much the nature hermit when you look at Poison Ivy, but like she is casting a bunch of spells, more or less. She's controlling all of like the vines around her. She's in love with plants.
It's kind of the danger of nature and the seductive appeal that actually can exist in the natural world.
Another one of my favorites is Captain Planet.
By your powers combined.
And it's all the elements.
Exactly. They're all there together. He has all that elemental power.
And he's literally there to save the planet from like pollution and all of that. Like that's in its core, it's very druidic.
A very heroic druid.
Yeah.
I think also we would be remiss not to mention all of the great inspiration that the druid class draws from in fairy legends of like Queen Titania and mystical forests inhabited by fairy spirits, or even the gods of and goddesses of nature like Freya and Demeter, who really inspire kind of the priesthoods that built up around druids.
So why don't we talk now about how to build your druid?
It's really actually hard to go wrong with building your druid because at its core, an adaptable class makes it difficult to specialize. And because you always have access to your animal forms and your different spells, it's more about choosing the right things day to day and moment to moment so that you can be adaptable. But there's a few key choices that you have to make early on.
So let's talk about our class overview. The first thing that we're going to look at is the hit points of the druid. They get a D8 hit die.
Not too bad. Plus they get light armor, medium armor, and shields. But druids will not wear metal armor of any kind.
Yeah, they like their wooden shields, their wooden armor. If you can describe that in cool ways and really kind of role play into that, how did you make your armor or your shield?
So druids have one of the more eclectic weapon proficiency lists.
Yeah, most people will get like simple weapons or martial weapons. They just get kind of like a barrage of strange weapons.
Yeah, you get things like the spear, the javelin, the quarterstaff, the scimitar, darts, slings, and clubs.
Sickles?
Yeah, it's really strange.
And other things.
You're not going to be using weapons too often, though, so just bring a scimitar and a quarterstaff.
So druids also get proficiency with herbalism supplies for their tools.
And for their skills, they get to choose 2 skills from skills that include animal handling, nature, perception, and survival. So really kind of those rugged wilderness type skills. And you get to pick 2 of them, so it's not a great selection. Hopefully you can get a few more cool ones from your background.
Yeah, but the ones that are there are pretty specific to what a druid stands for anyway.
And then finally, as a druid, you are proficient in intelligence and wisdom saving throws.
So regarding spellcasting for the druids, they are full spellcasters. They gain spells as they level up, all the way up to 9th level. Spells.
Very, very potent. It's all based on their wisdom ability score, which determines their spell saving throw DC, as well as their spell attack modifier. And druids then prepare spells once per day. They get to choose a number of spells equal to their character level plus their wisdom modifier. And they can choose anything on the druid spell list, which is a pretty big spell list. And we're going to go into detail later on exactly what some of the prime picks from that spell list are.
In light of all that, let's talk about ability scores.
Well, obviously, primary spellcaster, based on wisdom, you want a really good wisdom score.
Yeah, if you're not taking wisdom, that's going to be your spellcasting ability. It also ties into a lot of your proficiencies with skills that you get to choose.
Yeah, because wisdom connects to both animal handling, survival, perception, all skills which are going to be important for your druid. So I think your primary ability score is going to be wisdom, followed closely by constitution.
Yes, because once again, as a primary spellcaster, one of the main things that the druid does is cast a spell to concentrate on and then goes into wild shape. So
or starts casting other blasting spells or something.
So then, you want that concentration.
Exactly. Beyond that, your dexterity is useful just for rolling for initiative and having a slightly better armor class. Particularly for druids that plan on shapeshifting, though, your other ability scores are not too important.
No, because every time you wild shape, you take on those ability scores.
Yeah, nothing's really going to make you or break you. So that means that you can decide if you want your druid to be a little bit more social, give them a good charisma score. If you want them to be a little bit more intelligent, maybe more knowledgeable about the biology and geography of nature, give them a good intelligence score. If you want to have a good strength score, that's okay, but you're probably not going to use it that often.
So let's talk about some of the best races to play when you're playing a druid.
Iconic druids are definitely elves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wood elves have a great bonus to their wisdom, a few extra nice little perks, and I think that they really fit in with the culture and society that befits druids. They have that strong natural connection that is just reinforced as a druid.
Yeah, another one that pops into my head as a great druid is the dwarf.
Yeah, really surprising because we tend to think of dwarves as very industrious and very mechanically minded, which might put them at odds with nature. But hill dwarves get a bonus to their wisdom and a big bonus to their constitution scores, which is super useful.
And there's no need to say that dwarves don't have an attunement to nature, that nature could be stone or anything of that, but that's still part of nature.
I think dwarves in particular embody the connection to the earth. We would be remiss not to mention the human. And I think that the adaptability of humanity in Dungeons and Dragons syncs up really, really nicely with the adaptability of the druid class.
Yeah, because you get so many choices. You can really make your druid go either this way or that.
Yeah, there's a few other cool races like Kenku and Lizard Folk from Volo's Guide to Monsters that they have the ability scores in the right places. And are much more closer to their animal ancestors than the other races.
If we are picking that variant human, or just in general, if we're looking at the feats that are available to a druid, probably our best option, being a primary spellcaster, is going to be Warcaster.
Yeah, having the advantage on your concentration checks is really key for keeping the spells going in battle. And I would add to that the Resilient Constitution feat is a great pickup to get the proficiency in Constitution saving throws as well. And as a druid, depending on your spell selection, you might not even want to race to maximize your wisdom score. You just want to have that good wisdom score right away. So picking up these feats might really, really help your spell casting more than maxing out your wisdom right away.
So let's get into the best ability that I say the druid has, and the one that everybody will always want to use, and that is Wild Shape.
It's second only to their spell casting as the most iconic class feature of the druid, but also it's the most mechanically complex one as well. So your druid can assume a wild shape form twice as an action. Once you run out of uses, you have to take a short rest to regain your uses of wild shape. This combined with the fact that you can stay in wild shape form for 1 hour per druid level means that you pretty much have no excuse for not having wild shape available to you.
One important point to keep in mind is that when you do use Wild Shape, your game statistics change to the ones of the beast that you have Wild Shaped into.
So you're going to put your character sheet aside, and you're going to grab the stats right from the monster manual of the beast that you've chosen to transform into. However, there's some exceptions. You retain your own alignment and personality, so you've also got your own intelligence, wisdom, and charisma ability scores instead of those of the beast. So you can still roleplay your character, you're fully in control of your own actions. You also maintain your skill proficiencies and your saving throw proficiencies, and can use those if they're higher than those that the beast form has. Finally, while you're wild shaped, you can't cast spells, but you may be able to gain the benefit of certain feats that you've selected as well.
Also, regarding spellcasting, if you cast a spell before Wild Shaping that requires concentration, you can maintain concentration on that spell after you've Wild Shaped.
However, you can't speak. And in addition to this, you can't perform any actions that the creature that you've transformed into wouldn't logically be able to do.
There is a limit on the challenge rating of the beast that you can Wild Shape into.
Yeah, this is determined by the table in the player's handbook. So initially you can only transform into CR 1/4 creatures. And also at low levels, druids can't transform into creatures with swimming speeds or flying speeds.
Yes. Now the Moon Druid just helps you reach these faster. Not right away, but you do get more benefits to your Wild Shape from being a Moon Druid.
Particularly being able to transform into higher challenge rating creatures. But all druids can't fly in Wild Shape until they get to 8th level. Regardless of that, Wild Shape is so flexible. Because even just being able to transform into a CR 1/4 animal is a huge ability.
Well, at first you're like, oh man, that's a really low challenge rating. But what about infiltration purposes?
We see this all the time in our campaigns with druids. What dungeon is not filled with rats?
Yeah.
Or even just a squirrel or something?
I was going to say, when you're in the forest, a squirrel is the most inconspicuous thing to just run up the trees and see what's going on.
It's also amazing for navigating around underwater environments. Because you can turn into a fish,
yeah.
Right?
That's after you can have a swim speed.
Exactly, which is at 4th level.
Yeah, and then once you hit that flying speed, the tactical uses of being able to choose whether you want water speed, flying speed, or land speed, and all the different ways that you can use Wild Shape to solve problems, both in combat and outside of combat, is incredible.
I love it because when you get to 8th level and you can be a CR1 creature with a flying speed, that means you can become a giant eagle. So you can transform yourself into a giant eagle. Before you transform, cast polymorph on an ally to turn them into a giant eagle. Then your other friends hop on your backs and you fly away.
And that's how you solve all problems as a druid. So why don't we talk about our druidic circles?
And let's start with the Druid of the Moon.
Which is my favorite.
We've been talking about wild shape. I think it's everyone's favorite. It's the quintessential druid because it really powers up the capability of your wild shape and makes it something that you can actually rely on in battle. Whereas the default wild shape really isn't that powerful for combat.
Yeah, when you choose Circle of the Moon, it's basically a statement saying, I like wild shape, it's what I want to do with my druid, and I want to do it better.
Yeah, because the first thing is that it allows you to assume the form of an animal as a bonus action rather than an action. So in a single turn, you can cast a spell, then transform into your wild shape form.
It also ups the CR rating of the beast that you can wild shape into.
Yeah, so you get to start off being able to transform into a CR1 creature, and then as you level up as a druid, in general, it's 1/3 your level is the maximum challenge rating. So at level 6, you can become CR2 creatures, level 9, CR3, and so on and so on.
Are there any other really cool features of Circle of the Moon?
You can eat a spell slot as a bonus action to heal yourself while you're in the transformed. So this makes the druid extremely tanky because you can put up a defensive spell, turn yourself into a bear, and rock the front line.
What would you recommend for some of the best forms to change into for wild shape?
When in doubt, become a bear.
It's
a great damage dealing option. I think all the various bears, like the cave bear, the polar bear, and the brown bear, at the levels that you get them, they're excellent damage dealers. We mentioned, of course, the giant eagle is a fantastic form to assume, not necessarily in combat, but for exploration purposes.
Yeah. There are also some beasts that can do cool things like knock a creature prone or grapple them, like the giant scorpion. Or
the giant constrictor snake.
The constrictor snake is so useful.
There's nothing better than grabbing hold of a creature and keeping it in place while the rest of your party members beat the tar out of them. Eventually, as a Circle of the Moon druid, you gain the ability to use both your wild shape uses to transform into one of the challenge rating 5 elementals. And this ability comes online at level 10, making it really superb because the elementals are super powerful.
So next we have Circle of the Land, where if Circle of the Moon focuses on the wild shape aspect of the druid, Circle of the Land focuses more on the spell casting.
Yeah, and with the Circle of the Land, you choose a natural environment that your druid has a special bond with. And this gives you additional spells, which you always have prepared, some of which are exclusive to that specialization that druids don't normally get. So it's a great way to expand the adaptability of the druid as a spellcaster, while still getting the cool perks of the basic wild shape. You also get the natural recovery class feature, which is similar to the wizard's arcane recovery feature, letting you get more out of your spells because you can recover some with a short rest. And finally, the druids of the Circle of the Land also gain abilities that help them navigate through difficult terrain much better than even every druid does. The Circle of the Shepherd and the Circle of Dreams are quite a little bit more specialized than the Circle of the Land and the Circle of the Moon. And as a result, I feel that they're not as adaptable.
And as we talked about, this is one of the most adaptable classes. So having these kind of more specializations, you really need to kind of like what they're offering and really be into it if you're going to choose that.
The Circle of Dreams will give your druid a very powerful healing ability and make them a much better healer. So if you are kind of being driven towards that party role, you might appreciate the extra strength here. Whereas the Circle of the Shepherd really bolsters the summoning capabilities of the druid. I don't think, though, the boost that the Circle of the Shepherd gets as a summoner is equivalent to the boost that the Circle of the Moon gets as a shapeshifter. And so let's talk about some of our favorite spells to keep in mind as you're playing your druid.
We're going to start with some of the best damage dealing spells.
Yeah, and right off the bat, druids get a lot of really effective direct damage dealing spells like Thunder Wave, Erupting Earth, and Wall of Fire. Druids also get quite a few spells that require their concentration, but then deal damage every round. So spells like Moonbeam, Call Lightning, Wall of Fire, and Insect Plague, some of which are completely unique to the Druid.
Moonbeam is, I love seeing that one cast. It's so cool.
And Call Lightning is super iconic
Yeah.
as well, right? And these are all great spells to augment the damage dealing capability of a really aggressive wild shape form.
So next up, let's look at the battlefield control spells.
So the Druid spells are super unique in this regard.
Well, they're built to control nature.
They really are. So and a lot of it is done by like summoning up plants.
Yeah.
So you get spells like Entangle, Spike Growth, Plant Growth, or the more stone controlling spells like Wall of Stone, where it feels like plants are coming up out of the ground to grasp your foes and hold them in place.
Yeah, you're basically controlling all of the nature around you to basically attack the enemies, which is a really cool kind of way to visualize your druids summoning forth these vines or things of that nature.
Yeah, and so I think when compared to the damage dealing spells versus the control spells, your druid has to make that choice in the moment of like what's going to be the right ticket. So I find it's a really good idea to prepare one of each and then make that assessment at the start of a battle, what's going to be the right solution for that fight. You've got one other thing competing for your concentration, and that's the druid's summoning spells.
Summoning spells, summon woodland creatures.
And conjure animals, conjure elementals, conjure fae are amazing and pretty unique to the druid.
Yeah, you can get a small army of different creatures fighting for you, and they're either a meat shield or they can be a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. So another major aspect of the druid is they can be a big healer in the party.
Yeah, you get the full suite of restoration magic. If you're the only one bringing that in your party, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah, you can be the party healer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about the utility spells, and this is a huge category for the druid.
Yeah, and I think because as a druid, you start to get really overwhelmed at this point at all the different concentration spells, you want to keep an eye out for spells like Longstrider, Dark Vision, and Protection from Poison, which are low-level spells that you can use that last an hour that don't demand your concentration, but give you some really nice defensive and utility perks that will last the whole adventure.
Yeah, and as well, there's a lot of other utility spells like Pass Without Trace is really great. There's some really cool spells in here as well, like Bark Skin, Plant Growth. There's a few others as well, but
you can bring Dispel Magic, which is a great all-round spell.
It's probably
always
key.
You should always bring it if you can cast it. It's just useful for emergencies.
One of both of me and Monty's personal favorites is Polymorph.
Yeah. Because with Polymorph, it's a 4th level spell. It's a big boost to kind of your wild shape. It has some limitations that wild shape doesn't, but also some big benefits because you can get some much higher challenge rating beasts out of it, like the T-Rex, right? I think at this point we should also mention the interaction between Conjure Woodland Beings, because there's a lot of controversy over Conjure Woodland Beings because you can use it to summon pixies. And pixies themselves can cast Polymorph and fly. So there's this legend of the druid summoning 8 pixies who then transform the entire party into flying Tyrannosaurus Rexes. This is a lot of fun to happen once in a campaign. Never again.
One last category of spells that I think is pretty key for druids is their debuffs.
Or their main debuff, which is Fairy Fire.
Yeah. Fairy Fire is so helpful in any battle. Like I never have played a character that casts it, but I always like being in a party with somebody who does.
I would also mention Contagion is a 5th level spell that is so adaptable as a debuff, as an offensive battlefield control spell, that it's really worthwhile packing as you get into higher levels. It's worth mentioning that with the Druid, some dungeon masters feel that the Druid's summoning spells and wild shape spells are far too permissive. And so they might want to restrict what wild shape forms are available to the druid and what animals can and cannot be conjured with these spells, because they can cause a lot of problems.
One of the most common options that I see is a lot of DMs will say that you cannot turn into a creature or summon a creature that you have not encountered.
So it is worthwhile talking with your dungeon master about what their expectations are with both wild shape and conjuring animals, and decide whether your campaign is the type of campaign where it's okay to summon the Tyrannosaurus Rex transforming pixies or not, because that is the type of thing that can trigger a knee-jerk reaction from a dungeon master that is completely unprepared for it.
So let's talk about some fun ideas for role-playing your druid.
There are so many cool places to start with this, but let's begin with backgrounds.
Hermit, Urchin,
Outlander. I think there's a couple different ways to approach role-playing the druid.
Yeah.
The first is to kind of view your druid as a wild person on the fringes of society, maybe coming from a tribal society, or really connected to this druidic circle that lives on the edge of civilization, or maybe deep in the wilderness, right? So I think a really big role-playing question that you need to answer with your druid is both, what is your connection to nature? Does that mean that you're part of a tribe or an organization? And how does your druid feel about civilization? And I think that really plays up the antisocial nature of the druid, which is a little bit of a tired trope. But it can be a fun one in the right mix.
But you say antisocial, but at the same time, they're usually part of a circle, which makes them a very social... They're part of a group already.
And I think that with your druid, because your druid's going to go off into a life and adventure, maybe your druid circle has a rite of passage that they send their druids out into the world, and your objective is to find a sacred place, or rescue an endangered animal, or find some sort of elemental artifact to bring back to your druid. Maybe your druids are sent out into the world because you need to raise a standing stone in a sacred place to kind of shore up the borders between the natural world and the far realm.
On top of that, you could also go the route of, in any campaign, there's usually something upsetting the natural balance. There's usually some sort of natural habitat or environment that is being corrupted or changed by the evils in the world. Being a druid who's sent out to look into what's going on in those areas and try to correct the unbalance is a very easy way to tie into your druid loving nature and kind of setting forth to correct that.
There's a big reason for druids to be ever vigilant, exploring the natural world, and maybe just making sure that certain places that haven't been visited by humans in generations are seen by the eyes of the druids to make sure they're okay.
One of the other really cool ideas that we talked about in tying your druid to nature is we mentioned before that there's the nice side of nature, there's the harmony and the beauty, but there's also the ferocity of nature.
Yes, and your druid could, embody that, the strong survive, right? I think that there's a fun idea that people like to think, well, my druid's probably a vegetarian because they love animals. Maybe your druid is tied deeply to the savagery of nature, and in order to assume the form of an animal, your druid needs to eat it.
It's the circle of life.
Exactly. And so druids might be completely merciless in that respect and view the world through the lens of survival of the fittest. At the same time, they might still think about that spiritual connection and the animal spirits that you inhabit, even though they're savage creatures, could actually be iconic and inherited. So maybe when your druid transforms into a wolf, you're not just transforming into any wolf. You are transforming into the great white wolf of the Moon Hills, a legendary creature that has been passed down in your circle for generations.
At the same time, if you want to play the nice side of nature, that's okay too.
Yeah, and I think that there's this great angle to play that very peace and harmony, listening to the spirits, and always going out as your druid and asking, like, what is nature's call? What does the world demand of me?
At the same time, you don't always have to be going into this like, I'm in love with nature, I'm one with the trees. There is also the idea of the druid that's the biologist.
Yeah, that's studying nature and wants to discover its secrets. Great if your druid has a high intelligence score.
No matter what you choose here, the druid is going to be tied to nature and tied to the elements that really create a strong character with a very diverse range of options.
The natural world is all around you as a druid. You are in tune with the heartbeat of the seasons. the breath of the wind and of the earth, and the great sacred places of our world. And you can just go out and explore our own natural world and find inspiration for a druid almost anywhere.
So this has been our guide to the Druid class in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We hope that you feel inspired to take on the call of the wild and stand as a force of nature.
Of course, we would always love to hear about the druids that you've played in your own campaigns. And if you have any questions about how any of the druid mechanics work, let us know in the comments below.
And since they are a primary spellcaster, you may be interested in checking out our video on spells and spellcasting right over here.
If the druid is not for you, you might want to check out one of our other class guides right up over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.